Wow, where do I even begin? My fiance's ex-wife had an emergency, so he left me to care for his sick son, and then vanished for a week. And when he finally called, it wasn't to tell me he was coming back. No, it was to say he wasn't coming back at all. His parents have now disowned him, and somehow, they've given me his house. I'm 32, and I've been engaged to my fiancé, a 38-year-old man, for about 8 months. We've been living together in his house for the past year, and we've been navigating life as a blended family. He has a 7-year-old son from his previous marriage. The boy is autistic and often falls ill. He needs special care and constant attention. I'm not a trained caregiver, I'm just someone who cares for him, but it's been incredibly tough. Last week, my fiancé got a call from his ex-wife. She lives in another state, about 6 hours away. He told me there was some kind of emergency and he had to go help her. I was surprised, I admit, because they don't usually have much contact, beyond discussing their son's care. But I understood. Emergencies happen. I said, okay, go take care of what you need to do. He left that same day, saying he'd probably be back in 2 to 3 days. But here we are. A week has passed, and he still hasn't returned. Every day, I call him, and he gives me the same vague response, it's taking longer than expected. I'll be back soon. He won't tell me anything more than that. What's actually going on? What emergency is so important that he can't give me more details? Meanwhile, I'm alone, taking care of his son. It's exhausting. The boy's been sick with a fever for days, and I don't even know his medical history well enough to know what to do. He has meltdowns that I can't manage, and basic tasks I'm supposed to help him with. I don't always know the right way to do them. I'm getting more frustrated and scared by the day. Why won't my fiancé tell me what's really going on? Is there really an emergency? Or is something else going on that he's not telling me? I've asked him directly, and he just says things like, it's complicated, or I'll explain when I get back. When? When is he coming back? Part of me wonders if something serious has happened, and he's protecting me from bad news. But then, another part of me can't shake the suspicion that he's lying. Why won't he just tell me the truth? I love his son, but I'm not his parent. This is so much more than I ever expected. I'm not equipped to be his sole caregiver for this long. I'm terrified that I might mess up and hurt him in some way. And what about my fiancé? He doesn't seem to understand how hard this is for me. Every time I call, he barely asks how we're doing. He hasn't offered to come back, hasn't sent anyone else to help. It's like he's forgotten about us completely. I don't know what to do. I can't just leave his son alone, but I'm at my wit's end. I've thought about calling his parents to ask for help, but I'm afraid of overstepping. I don't want to cause drama, especially if there really is a family emergency happening. Am I overreacting? Should I be more patient? Or is this as weird as it feels to me? I keep questioning everything. If he can just leave us like this, with no explanation, what does that say about his commitment to me, to us, to our future? I could really use some advice. Has anyone been in a similar situation? What should I do? Wow, this blew up overnight. Thank you all for your responses and support. I'll try to answer some of the common questions. Yes, I've tried texting him. He responds, but with the same vague answers every time. No, I don't have contact information for his ex-wife, I've never met her. His son is in special education, but school is out for summer break right now. I work from home part-time, which is how I've been managing to care for him 24/7. My fiancé and I have been together for 2 years in total, and I've known his son for most of that time. But this is the first time I've ever been left alone with him for more than a day. A lot of you have suggested I call the police or have his ex-wife's city do a welfare check. I'm considering it, but I'm scared of causing problems if there really is a family emergency. I think I'll give him one more day to give me a real explanation. If he doesn't, I'll call his parents first, and then maybe consider calling the police. Some of you have asked for more background on our relationship and his previous marriage, so here's what I know. My fiancé and his ex-wife were married for 9 years. They divorced when their son was 4. From what he's told me, the stress of caring for a special needs child was a big factor in their split. His ex-wife struggled with depression and felt overwhelmed. They tried counseling, but in the end, they decided to separate. The divorce wasn't super messy, but it wasn't amicable either. They disagreed a lot about their son's care and custody arrangements. Eventually, they settled on my fiancé having primary custody, with his ex-wife getting visitation 1 weekend a month and a week during summer and winter breaks. My fiancé told me that his ex-wife loves their son but has a hard time coping with his needs, which is why she agreed to limited custody. She pays child support, but it's often late. My fiancé doesn't like to talk about her much, but he's mentioned that she's had some personal struggles since the divorce. I get the impression that he meant mental health or maybe substance issues, but he never gave me details. When I met my fiancé, he had been divorced for about a year. He was upfront about having a special needs child and made sure I understood what I was getting into. I've always known that his son is his top priority, and I respect that. It's one of the things I love about him. He's an amazing, devoted father. Our relationship progressed quickly. We moved in together after a year of dating, and he proposed 4 months after that. Things have been good overall. He's kind, hardworking, and treats me well. We've had challenges adjusting to life as a blended family, but nothing major. Until now. That's why this whole situation is so confusing and hurtful. It's completely out of character for him to be so uncommunicative and to just leave us like this. I keep wondering if I've missed some signs or red flags along the way. What should I do? Since so many of you have been asking, let me fill you in on more details about my fiancé's son. He's 7 years old and nonverbal. He communicates primarily through a tablet app and some basic signs. His world is fragile, and when it's disrupted or when he gets overstimulated, he can have meltdowns. It's heartbreaking to watch, especially since I don't always know how to manage them. He also has several food allergies and sensitivities that require a special diet, and epilepsy, although mostly controlled by medication, still causes occasional seizures. Physically, he's smaller than other kids his age, and his motor skills are delayed, so even basic tasks like bathing, dressing, and using the bathroom require constant help. He wears pull-ups at night and sometimes during the day, especially if we're going to be out for a long time. He's enrolled in a special education program during the school year where he gets speech therapy, occupational therapy, and other services, but when he's home, it's like I'm his lifeline. He has trouble sleeping, and I find myself waking up multiple times a night to check on him. I've cared for him before, but always with my fiancé by my side. This is the first time I've been entirely responsible for him, and let me tell you, it's overwhelming. I'm terrified. Terrified of missing a sign that he needs medical help, terrified that I might do something wrong, terrified that I'll fail him in some way. Some of you suggested calling his doctor or therapist for advice, and honestly, that's probably a good idea. I think I'm going to do that today. I'm going to make a list of all his care providers and try to get some guidance. But then there's the bigger issue, my fiancé. Part of me wants to give him the benefit of the doubt, but how much longer can I keep doing that? Another part of me is already saying that this is unforgivable. Why is he doing this? I'm at a breaking point, and I need answers. I need him to come back, to explain this, but he hasn't even bothered to call or check in properly. I've been patient. I've been patient for far too long. And then I started to think, maybe I need to get others involved. What about his parents? Could they help? But, of course, I don't want to overstep. I don't want to make things worse, but at what point do I have to stop worrying about that and do what's best for the boy? Am I overreacting? Should I just wait longer? But what does that say about me? I'm questioning everything now. Is this really a family emergency, or is it something else entirely? Update: well, I have news, but it's far from good. I finally broke down this morning and called my fiance's parents. They were completely blindsided. They had no idea he was even out of town. Shocked, they rushed over to help with their grandson. While they were on their way, I made the decision to call the police department in his ex-wife's city and request a welfare check. The officer who answered was really understanding and said they'd send someone over right away. An hour later, the police called me back. They had spoken with both my fiancé and his ex-wife, and the worst part? Everything was fine. No emergency. There was no danger. No crime. The officer couldn't share much more, citing privacy laws, but he assured me there was no evidence of anything amiss. My mind was still reeling when my fiancé finally called me. I could feel my heart race as I saw his name on the screen. But when I answered, the relief I expected never came. His voice was strange, calm even, and then he said the words I'll never forget, "I'm not coming home." I couldn't process it. "What do you mean you're not coming home?" I choked out. "What about your son? What about us?" There was this long, agonizing silence. Then, in that calm, almost rehearsed tone, he said it, "Sarah and I have decided to give our marriage another try. We've reconnected over the past week, and we feel like this is the right thing to do." I could barely breathe. The anger, the disbelief, it hit me like a ton of bricks. "But your son," I stammered. "He needs you. He's autistic. He needs stability, routine. You can't just leave him." The silence stretched again. His voice was quieter this time, almost embarrassed, and then came the words that made me see red. "We feel it would be too difficult to care for a child with such high needs while we're rebuilding our relationship. We think it's best if he stays with you and my parents for now." I snapped. "You're leaving your autistic son because he's inconvenient to your new life plans?" I hissed, rage filling every corner of my body. "Who are you? I don't even recognize you right now." He tried to explain, to justify it, but I wasn't listening. I told him exactly how disgusted and hurt I was. I called him a coward, a terrible father, a liar. "I'm calling the authorities," I told him. "You can't do that," he protested weakly. "Watch me," I snapped, and hung up. I was trembling, stunned, just sitting there in shock. Then, I heard a small voice behind me. "Where's Daddy?" It was his son, standing in the doorway, clutching his tablet. My heart shattered. How could I explain this to him? How could I tell him his father, the one person who was supposed to love him and care for him, wasn't coming back? I managed to get him back to bed with vague reassurances, telling him Daddy would be home soon, even though I knew that wasn't true. Once he was asleep, I called my fiancé's parents. They arrived an hour later, looking worried and confused. I told them everything, and his mother, she broke down crying. His father, though, his face turned bright red with anger as I spoke. "What about his son?" he thundered. "What about his son?" His mother couldn't stop shaking, tears streaming down her face. "I don't understand," she said. "This isn't like him at all. He loves that boy more than anything." We spent most of the night alternating between anger, confusion, and grief. The next morning, we had a plan. We went to the police station, and when we explained everything, the officers took detailed statements from all of us. They assured us they would open an investigation into child abandonment, especially since he's a special needs child. They take cases like this very seriously. Next, we met with a lawyer to discuss custody options. Since my fiancé and I weren't married, I had no legal rights to his son. But his parents, as next of kin, could file for emergency custody. The lawyer got the paperwork started immediately. And in the middle of all this, my phone was buzzing nonstop with calls and messages from my fiancé. What could he possibly want now? I ignored all of them. I couldn't bear to hear his voice or read his excuses. When we finally got home, his parents sat me down at the kitchen table. Their faces were tired, their eyes full of pain, but there was a steely determination there, too. His father, his voice cracking with emotion, was the first to speak. "We've made a decision," he said. I blinked in surprise, my heart hammering in my chest. "Are you sure?" "That's a huge step," I asked, the words barely leaving my mouth. His mother nodded, wiping away a tear. "We can't condone what he's done," she said quietly, her voice steady but breaking with the weight of it all. "Abandoning his child, lying to all of us. It's unforgivable. We don't want anything to do with someone who would do that, even if he is our son." His father's voice grew gruffer, the anger thick in his words. "I don't know what's gotten into him, but I do know this: I can't call someone who would abandon their special needs child my son." I nodded, understanding their pain, their anger, because it mirrored my own. It hurt, it was raw, but they were right. We were all right. His mother continued, trying to offer a glimmer of comfort, even through her tears. "We want you to stay here, as long as you need. We know this has been a huge shock, and we don't want you to worry about finding somewhere else to live on top of everything else." I opened my mouth to protest, but she held up her hand, stopping me. "Please, let us do this. You've been so good to our grandson, and we know he trusts you. We think it would be best if he stays here with you for now, where things are familiar." I was overwhelmed. "Thank you," I managed to whisper through the lump in my throat. The next few days were a blur. We had meetings with social workers, more talks with lawyers, and countless conversations with my ex-fiance's son, trying to explain things in a way he could understand. It broke my heart every time he asked, "Where's Daddy? When's Daddy coming home?" He didn't understand why his father wasn't there, and I had no answers that didn't feel like lies. Meanwhile, my ex continued to bombard me with messages, apologies, justifications, pleas for understanding. He said he still loved his son, that this was for the best, that he and Sarah were moving to another state for a fresh start. He begged me not to tell the authorities. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I forwarded every message to the detective handling the case. Days turned into weeks, and somehow, we settled into a new routine. My ex's parents came over every day, helping with their grandson. Together, we did our best to keep his routine as stable as possible, knowing how crucial it was for him. I dove into learning everything I could about caring for a child with autism, books, online support groups, long talks with doctors and therapists. It was overwhelming at times, but I was determined to do right by this little boy who'd already been through so much. Through it all, his grandparents were there. Every meltdown. Every sleepless night. Every small victory. They never complained, even though I knew they were still processing their own grief and anger over their son's actions. One night, about a month after everything had happened, I sat on the porch, exhausted, finally having gotten my ex's son to sleep. His grandmother came out and sat beside me. "How are you holding up, dear?" she asked softly. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Managing," I said. "It's hard, but we're getting there." She nodded, patting my hand. "You're doing an amazing job. We can't thank you enough for sticking by our grandson through all of this." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I love him," I whispered, the words simple but true. I couldn't imagine walking away, no matter how hard it gets. She smiled sadly. "That's what being a parent is all about. It's a shame our son couldn't understand that." We sat together in companionable silence, watching the stars. After a while, she asked, "Have you heard anything from him?" I shook my head. "Not since last week. He sent another long email trying to explain himself." I didn't respond. She sighed, her voice heavy. "I never thought I'd say this about my own child, but I'm glad he made his choice. Now he has to live with the consequences." I nodded, the mix of sadness and anger swirling inside me. I keep wondering if there were signs I missed. If I should have seen this coming. She squeezed my hand. "Don't do that to yourself. None of us saw this coming. He fooled all of us." As I sat there, I reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. A month ago, I thought I knew what my future looked like. I was going to marry a man I loved, be a stepmother to a special needs son, and build a life together. Now that future was gone, replaced by something I never could have imagined. I was living in my ex-fiance's house, helping to raise his son alongside his parents. My days were filled with therapy appointments, meltdown management, and countless small challenges. It wasn't the life I had planned, but as I sat there on the porch, I realized it was a life I was coming to love. This little boy, abandoned by his own father, had stolen my heart completely. His grandparents, who had every right to walk away from this mess, had instead embraced me as family. Yes, there was still pain. Yes, there were moments when I wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. But there was also love, purpose, and a sense of belonging I hadn't expected to find in the aftermath of such betrayal. As for my ex, I've heard through the grapevine that he and his ex-wife did indeed move out of state. The police investigation is still ongoing, and there will likely be legal consequences for his actions. Part of me hopes he faces justice for what he's done, but mostly, I just hope he stays away. His son deserves better. And we're all determined to give him the love and stability he needs. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand why my ex did what he did. But I do know one thing: I am exactly where I need to be right now, helping to care for a little boy who deserves all the love in the world. Thank you all for your support during this incredibly difficult time. Your kind words and advice have meant more than you know. I may not update again for a while, as I want to focus on our new family dynamic and giving my ex's son all the attention he needs. But please know, your support has made a real difference in our lives.